My wife and I started market gardening pretty much like everybody else. We met at university, we had studied ecology, and we just felt like we wanted to make a difference. We didn't really know how, and then we stumbled across a small organic farm starting woofing. And that was the start of something interesting for us. We saw that there was a lifestyle, we saw that we can make a positive difference in meaningful ways by doing something with our hands. We knew nothing about gardening, and we just plunged right into it and learned a lot through experiences. We bought this old rabbit farm in 2004, which had 7-acre and woodlots and a 2-acre prairie, which we thought would make a great market garden. We didn't know a lot back then, but we just felt that if we went in and started doing it, we could get something going. And that's how we started. So we have a CSA of 140 families, and we also do 2 farmers market. And we have a signature salad mix that we sell to different restaurants around the area. Our sales, more or less, the last 6-7 years have been around $150,000 on the acre and a half that we cultivate from April to December. Because of the intensive system that we have on the farm, and because of the ability of having a super good crop planning calendar, we're able to generate maximum amount of revenues at low cost and with low capital investment. All of the tools that we use on the farm are low tech, most of them are hand tools. It's all about technique, how to use them to make it work so that we can generate this income on the farm. The main income goes to my wife and I. We generate a full salary from the sales of the farm. We also have 2 full-time paid employees that are with us from April to November, and we have 2 interns on the farm. 4 people full-time would be able to run the farm. The reason why we have interns is because we want to give young people a chance to learn what we're doing here. We've been making a living for more than a decade on this 2-acre prairie, and today I'm super happy and pleased to be presenting our farm and some of the techniques that we've evolved into and learned through the years, passing them along to you guys, hopefully with the intention that it can help you kickstart your own project. So jump in, we'll show you the farm, we'll show you what we're doing, and hopefully you can get something out of it. We're located in southern Quebec, just north of the US border with Vermont, so our growing season is quite short. Our last frost date is around mid-April, and our first frosts come around mid to late October. The way our farm is laid out allows for efficiency at every step of the growing process. The warehouse is located right in the middle of the farm, so whether it's to go pick up a tool or to bring some of the harvest back to the washing station or cold room, we're never more than a minute's walk away. The farm is divided into 10 plots of equal dimensions that we use as the basis of our crop rotation system. Each plot is composed of 16 beds that are 30-inch wide and 100 feet long. But we'll come back to that. The greenhouse is a big part of our system here on the farm. We're in a northern climate, and it's important for us that we can do our starts really early on in the spring. So the greenhouse is heated, and we do all of our seedlings in the spring, and we also do tomatoes in the summer. We also have 2 hoop houses that come in really handy for season extension, for salad mix both in the spring and in the fall, and also for our cucumber production in the midst of the summer. So we've learned through time that most of these sensitive crops, Solanaceae, the nightshades, they grow a lot better if they're under shelter. And we want to be early at market. Reason is we're competing against other growers, and as market gardener, I think one of our advantages is to be as early as possible at farmers market with everything you can bring. Anything you can do to bring your products earlier to market, you'll be a winner that way. Using small spaces, systems that are easier to put in motions, it's easier perhaps for you than a bigger mechanized growers to come up with a solution that's going to kickstart your production. And the first one on the market is going to capture most of the sales and the retention of all these customers that come into your booth before going to that of the other. Given how expensive it can get to heat the greenhouse in February in our part of the world, we use a room in our house with south-facing windows to start some of the seedlings early on. Tomatoes are all started this way and then moved into the greenhouse in March when we start heating it. When setting up a greenhouse or hoop house, consider that the north-south orientation is better for light distribution during the growing season, but that east-west will capture more sunlight in the winter months. If you're using your house for season extension, east-west is probably your best bet. I recommend using low-tech, simple systems for heating, irrigation, and ventilation of the greenhouse. This will help reduce your setup costs. Remember that proper ventilation is critical in your greenhouse if you want to avoid fungal disease. We'll even go as far as turning up the heating system during the summer months to get rid of our excess humidity. So we're now in the nursery, and most of the vegetables on our farm, that's where they start their lives. We set up a nursery every year, and we try to grow transplants as much as we can, even the smaller one like beets and spinach. The reason is it's a lot easier to control the germination, and it allows us to have part of the growing period inside the greenhouse. We've set for conventional cell flats or plugs, which are commonly used and I think the easiest and most effective way to proceed. They're always standardized with their width and their length, but you can have many different cells. We'll use either 72 or 128 cell flats depending on what we're seeding. Filling up the trays, it's pretty straightforward. You'll get your soil mix that is just a bit wet, and then you'll fill up the tray this way. Clean it up, make sure there's no excess, and then you drop it, and that creates a cavity that is necessary for when you'll be dropping the seeds. I'll take my excess soil, bringing it into over here. The quality of the soil mix is critical to the success of your seedlings. Just a small amount of growing medium has to give young plants everything they need for a good start, so you really can't improvise. It's possible to prepare your own soil mix, but for a few years now, we've been purchasing ours from specialized suppliers. It's much faster, and in the end, it worked out to be cheaper. When you're stacking the trays, it's important that you stack them in a cross shape so that they don't compact on each other. All of the soil that is left over, I put in a box, then I'll put back later on and reuse, so I'm not losing any soil while I'm preparing my seed mix. So we're seeding salads, and I'm using this little device. It's a little hand seeder, filling it with the seeds I need, and then there's different holes. And you'll find the right hole for the seed size that you're using, and then it's just a matter of getting the hang of it and dropping the seeds one by one. So this little handy device works better than in most often case if you're doing it by hand. The other option is also to just roll them like that. So you can try both and see what you like best. The next step is to take soil mix that is really dry, that I haven't wet, and I cover everything up. I'm doing mini heads of Claremont. It's a French cultivar that's really nice. Putting this on masking tape, identifying my tray, and we're ready to go. Plants that spend a longer time in cells, such as tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, or eggplant, will be potted up from cell trays into individual 4-inch cells for an additional 4 to 6 weeks. Potting up not only saves space when the heated area is limited, but also provides the transplants with new potting mix rich in nutrients. This is a vacuum seeder, And this is just an amazing gizmo. We use it to really speed up the amount of time it takes to prepare a seed tray. So what it is, it's a wooden empty box connected to a vacuum cleaner, and the vacuum cleaner will suck the air, and you'll drop your seeds on this plexiglass that has holes that are set to go in the middle of each tray. You drop your seeds on it, and then the air from the vacuum cleaner will suck the seeds into the holes. You'll flip it onto the tray, and then you'll shut down your vacuum cleaner and the seeds will drop. When you're watering your seedlings, it's important to do it in 2 phases. The first one will only get the surface of the soil wet, but the second one will ensure a deep watering of the plants to promote root development. This important principle also applies if you're watering plants in the fields. Also remember that watering seedlings early on with water that's too cold will slow down their growth. That's why we keep a large water reservoir inside our greenhouse. We'll keep starting new seedlings throughout the season, but those will be started directly outdoors since frost is no longer an issue. We always produce more seedlings than we need for the farm, and we sell our surplus after the first round of transplants in the field. The sale of seedlings to neighborhood gardeners gives us an extra income at a time when we don't have any vegetables to sell. The space occupied by our nursery in the greenhouse will be converted to tomato production once we've taken the seedlings outside. The reason that we farm without a tractor successfully is because we've adopted a permanent bed system. We've shaped the bed once using shovels many years ago, and we've been cultivating the surface ever since. We get around using less than $300 of gasoline that we put in our BCS walking tractor every year. Basically, we're using almost zero fossil fuel because we're simply not moving earth around. Because they're permanent, you're standardizing much of your operations. So the first thing that you need to take into account is how to orient your beds. Is it north-south, east-west? That's not your main priority. You need to be orienting your beds for channeling excess water out of your growing space. If you have a slope, you want to orient your beds in line with the slope so that any excess water from excess rainfall will be drained away from your growing area. Another advantage of the raised bed, and that's an important one, is that you're always circulating in your pathways. So you're limiting compaction to only the area where you're not growing, which is really makes a lot of sense. By adopting this strategy, you're allowing almost zero compaction to happen, you're not moving a lot of soil around, you're raising your beds, making sure that all the excess water gets drained away from your growing area. So there's a lot of advantage that are built in to this fundamental way of using bed systems that are permanent. Then it's just a matter of finding the right tools to direct seed your crop, transplant your crops, and to work your soil the least you can to create this biologically active soil that's going to allow your crops to really thrive. Raised beds provide better drainage and allow the soil to heat up faster in the spring. Because they're permanent, we end up applying amendments only where they're needed, on the beds themselves, and not all over the field like a manure spreader would do. So when we're talking about permanence, we're talking about designs and customization. Our beds are 30-inch wide and our alleyways 18-inch. One of the reasons why the alleyways are 18 is that you want to make sure that when you're harvesting in a crouching position, you have enough space not to disrupt or to break the crop that is leaning in the back. One of the other reasons why you want to work in 30-inch bed system is that, again, in a crouching position, you have access to the center of the bed without hyperextending your back. This might sound like something not so important, but consider this. Harvesting is half of the workload on the farm. That's what you're going to be doing half of the time that you're working in your market garden. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable doing this, especially if you're thinking about making a career out of it. 30 inches is also the width of most of the tools that we use, including many of the attachments made for the BCS walk-behind tractor. The beds are standardized in their width, but also in their length. All of our permanent beds on the farm are 100 feet long. That makes it so that all of your row covers, drip irrigation, sprinkler lines, you need less of them because they're all the same size and you can move them around anywhere you want on the farm. We're using the bed, the 100-foot bed, as a unit of measure to calculate all of our inputs and also the yields of our productions. The beds don't need to be 100 foot per se. They could be 30, they could be 40, they could be 60, but they should all be the same length. So that's how you create uniformity and versatility on your farm. Bed preparation. It's a super important part of growing vegetables. On our farm, we've been following a minimal tillage practice where we try to do the bed prep without disturbing the ecology of the soil as much as we can. We start with a bed that was covered with a plastic tarp. The tarp kills the weeds and speeds up decomposition of vegetable or green manure residues. When you remove it after a few weeks, you'll have a clean soil ready to be worked with. Every other year, we use a rotary plow to reshape our beds as they tend to level down over time. This attachment to the walking tractor takes the soil in the alleys and throws it back onto the bed, giving it more height, thereby increasing the depth of drainage and the growing space for plant roots. A pass with the broad fork then decompacts the soil down to about 12 inches. But does so without disturbing the soil's ecology or structure. Of all the bed preparation tools that we use on the farm, it's the only one that goes any deeper than the first few inches. This is definitely one of the secrets to creating a healthy soil for your plants to grow in. During the first years, we've focused on building up the soil by applying 5 or 6 wheelbarrows of compost on each of our 100-foot beds. Over the years, our soils have improved a great deal and have a lot more organic matter, so now each bed will receive compost only every other year. For fertility, we also use a mix of vermicompost and chicken manure. The compost helps feed the soil with helpful microorganisms and organic matter, while the chicken manure gives the plant the nitrogen boost they need, especially early in the season. For the last step of bed preparation, we switched the attachment of the walking tractor to a rotary power harrow. The tines of this tool mix in the amendments to the first few inches of the soil, while the roller in the back firms and levels the ground. One pass with this tool leaves us with a bed that is perfectly conditioned to be seeded or transplanted in. Following these guidelines, it takes me about 45 minutes to prepare 4 seed beds that are all 100 feet long. I think we've found a technique that is both ecological, economical, but most importantly, very efficient. So we're using not a lot of fossil fuel, we're creating great habitat for the plants, and we're doing it with tools that are not expensive. The walking tractor we use is an Italian-made BCS unit. It's versatile, robust, and designed to do soil work on small cultivated areas. Just like a 4-wheel tractor, it can run different tools from a single power source, and its handlebars are reversible, so you can mount attachments in the back or in the front. all composts are not created equal. Make sure that you're using the best compost possible. And if you don't know how to make it right, you should buy it. That's what we did since we started the farm, and I would even argue that it's one of the biggest factors to the success that we've had over time. By collaborating with people that knew what they were doing, we made sure that we were adding premium compost to build up our soils. It's not easy to make premium compost. So again, if you can't make it, or if you're not dedicated enough to really learn how to do it well, why not just buy it from somebody that is specialized in it?
Our strategy for when and how much to fertilize is directly related to our crop rotation. As I mentioned before, our farm is divided into 10 plots of equal dimensions. On each plot, we aim to grow crops of the same botanical family or with similar fertilization needs. Rotating crops every year makes it more difficult for insect pests or disease to establish and also reduces depletion of nutrients in the soil. Our rotation is based on 5 vegetable families: alliums, brassicas, cucurbits, nightshades, and another group we call light feeders, which includes legumes and some light feeder crops from all of the other families. In practice, it might look somewhat like this. On the plot where we'd grow nightshades the first year, we'd follow with light feeders, then alliums, then back to light feeders, moving on to summer squash and brassicas, so on and so forth. So we essentially would grow a more demanding crop every other year and add compost only on those years. When planning what to grow where and when, we also consider characteristics that will make maintenance more efficient. Crops that go together might be those that will be planted the same day, or those that all require row covers or insect nets. They can also be direct seeded crops that we water with our sprinkler line. So one other thing that we've talked about is adding fertility to the soil by adding compost or natural fertilizers. But there's another way to do this by relying on what is called a green manure. Green manures are a crop that you're growing not to sell for market, but for different purpose, namely to add fertility to the soil. When you're growing certain legumes, such as peas, vetch, clover, these plants have the amazing capacity to take the nitrogen that is present in the air and bring it back down to the soil. And so when you're growing these legumes, you're actually adding nitrogen into your soil. For this exchange to happen though, there needs to be certain bacteria that are present into the soil. These rhizobium, they create little nodules on the root system which will allow this process of nitrogen fixation to happen from the air to the soil. And you can simply pull out the roots and verify if you have them in your soil. If you don't, it's not a problem because you can always inoculate your soil with these special rhizobium. Green manures have different functions, and there's a lot of green manures that you can grow, and you can always have a lot of combinations between, oats and peas, rye and vetch, whatever. What's important is to try to figure out what you want to do, cover up the soil in the spring and in the fall, suffocate weeds by growing something that grows really fast, such as buckwheat. There's all sorts of green manures that you can use with different functions, and the trick is to have the whole arsenal of them at your disposal to do many different things in the garden. One thing you need to know about green manures is that when you're growing them to add fertility to the soil, you're going to mow them and bury them. And it's going to take up to 2 weeks for your soil to digest these green manure before the soil is ready again to be seeded in. It's great because you're growing your amendments on site, but it's taking up a lot of space and time in your garden. this is valuable growing space. And that's why we're always looking for ways to either grow green manures, short green manures before a crop or after, or even to grow them while you're growing your crop. One easy example is you'll be having broccolis that are there, and a couple of weeks before you're ready to harvest them, you'll broadcast different seeds of green manure onto the soil, and eventually, as soon as the broccoli's heads are harvested, you'll have the green manure that is all reestablished and ready to take up the space. So it's really important never to leave your soil bare, especially in the winter months. So green manures or cover crops are then a great way to make sure that you're not doing that. Certain crops like rye in my northern Canadian climate can be seeded all the way up to October and November. They don't need to be fully mature. As long as you have something growing on your soil, you'll prevent a lot of the erosion that takes your fertility away when it's being leached by heavy rainfall, or in our case, the snowpack that melts in the spring.
So here we find ourselves in front of a really nice green manure of cowpeas that I've seeded 5 weeks ago. The traditional way of incorporating green manures is to till them under using a rototiller. That way the nitrogen gets back into the soil. In accordance to our minimal tillage approach here on the farm, we want to avoid the rototiller as much as we can. So the way we're going to go around that and making sure that we're still doing green manures is that first of all, we're going to use a flail mower to shred the green manure into bits and pieces. And then we're going to use a rotary plow to take the dirt from the aisle and shoot it onto the bed, burying the green manure into the top inches of our permanent beds. So this way we're not disturbing the ecology of the soil in the beds. This is a minimal tillage approach to dealing with green manures.
To speed up decomposition, we'll then cover the beds with plastic tarps for 2 or 3 weeks.
What's so great about these tarps is that when there's a crop residue, you can just apply these tarps and come back a couple of weeks later, nothing will be left underneath the tarp except good black soil. So it's a great way to clean up your beds without using the rototiller. Generally speaking, these tarps, we'll leave them from 2 to 4 weeks depending on temperature. If it's really warm in the summer, it's going to go a lot faster to decompose the organic matter. If you're in the fall or in the spring, you might need to plan for more time, at least 4 weeks. It really depends on what's underneath the tarp and how warm it is above ground. What we're doing here and what's so different about our farm is that because of the land limitation that we had when we started the farm, we had a 2-acre prairie that we had to manage to make it viable for both my wife and I to have decent salaries coming out of it. So first of all, we wanted to have the crops spaced as close as possible so to have more yields per acres. Trying to have the leaves of the crop touch one another at 3/4 of their growth. When you do that, you get a canopy. And that's really key to the success of the biologically intensive cropping systems. You have this canopy that not only shades out the weeds, it also retains the moisture, and it creates a habitat that is really helpful for all of the biological life that's inside your soil. So instead of having these cropping system, which, it seems like you're growing soil because that's all you see, you have these permanent beds of densely seeded crops quickly forming a canopy. The rest of the game is to get organic matter content risen and get good soil structure so that the root systems, they can really shoot down and not compete with one another for nutrients and for water availability. You'll be more efficient in most of the chores that you'll be doing on the farm. This is a bed of carrot, 5 rows on 30-inch. If you're spacing them, 1 row and then you're leaving 20 or 30-inch, 1 row like a typical mechanical setup is, trying to imagine when you're covering your rows with row cover or insect net. So we're using 5 times less space to grow the exact same number of crops. That means that I use 1/5 of the same material to do the same job. It's going to cost me 1/5 of the price, but most importantly, I'm going to cover my crops 5 times faster. An increment of 5 when you're farming on a small scale makes a lot of difference. When you're harvesting, when you're cultivating your soil, the fact that you've intensified makes you more efficient. And that's really the secret to successful market gardening.
So here we're ready to transplant some lettuces. And usually on the permanent beds, the way we go about preparing their seed beds is we'll use the broad fork and also the power harrow on the BCS walk behind tractor. I understand though that not everyone is going to get a big power harrow or such a big power unit for their market garden or their urban farm. So a nice alternative to that is simply to use a wheel hoe. Once you've opened up the soil with the broad fork, you'll put your amendments in, and then you're just going to mix everything up, tilting the soil with a wheel hoe. The wheel hoe will prepare the soil so all of the crop residues or the weeds that are popping up will be destroyed, and then you'll be ready to rake the soil and transplant your crops into the ground. We've prepared the seed bed really nicely. Now we're getting ready to transplant, and it's important to mark the rows. So to mark the rows, we use these interchangeable plastic tubes that we simply fit on the tine of the bed prep rake. And depending on if you're doing 4 rows, 3 rows, 2 rows, you can easily change them. So today I'm doing lettuces. So this is 3 rows. You go like this, and we'll mark our rows.
The goal here is not to have perfectly straight lines, but to maintain equal distance between the rows. This will greatly simplify the job when you come back to cultivate with tools such as the stirrup hose. Once you've marked your rows along the length of the bed, you can easily mark plant spacings by using the rake in the other direction. Before you transplant, you'll want to make sure both your plants and the soil are wet enough. This is important for rapid root uptake. We water the cell flats thoroughly before transplanting, and unless the soil's already wet, we also water the beds, at least along the rows where we'll plant. When you're doing intensive spacings, then there's a lot of transplant per square foot. You want to be doing this as efficiently as possible. It's all a question of diminishing each gestures to save seconds here and there. I've did the grid line, so that's a great start. We don't need to be thinking about our spacing anymore. You'll take your plant, take your 2 fingers, put it in the ground, boom, and then move on to the next one. A lot of people, they spend too much time is to make holes and then put it on and then go like this and that. And then I just take twice as much time to do the same task. And multiply these seconds by the number of plants that you need to put in the ground, it makes a difference. It's critical to keep the ground moist for the next few days following transplanting. If plant roots don't have enough water at this stage, the crop will be fragile for the rest of its life. So we're in Norton climate here. So what we've done is that we've put a caterpillar tunnel over here, and that allows us to transplant these nice lettuce heads really early on. Now that the weather is much warmer, we want to move the tunnel once more and bring it onto the solanaceas, tomatoes, eggplants, and bell peppers, which will be really happy with the extra heat in the middle of the season. One technical detail with these caterpillar tunnel is the importance of having both beginning arches really anchored down well. To add the rigidity, what we do is that we put 2 crossbars that will hold the 3 first arches together, and that will solidify the whole structure. The other point that is interesting is these hooks. You can slide them in, slide them out really easily, and then when you want to open your tunnel, you'll just slip the plastic onto the hook, and that will give you the opening. When you're ready to close it down, you just slip it back in, and then the plastic will go all the way down.
Caterpillar tunnels can easily be taken down and reassembled in a different location by 2 people in a couple of hours. They're a great way to extend your season in the spring and in the fall, and can be moved 2 or 3 times a year to follow your crop rotation.
These caterpillar tunnels, you want them to be really short when it's the spring and there's heavy winds. But when comes summertime and we're growing tomatoes, bell peppers, and eggplants, we really appreciate the fact that we have more height. So what we do is we have these extenders that we put in the middle of the summer, and then in the fall, again, when we have crops that are shorter crops, we'll remove them and we'll have a smaller caterpillar tunnel.
Now we find ourselves inside the caterpillar tunnel, ready to transplant the nightshade for the summer. We need to make sure that both the plant and the hole are really wet. So we'll take our plants. The clump and the hole needs to be firmly pressed in one another so that there's no air pocket left between the two. At the end of the process, the soil should be level with that of the clump. We'll firmly press it into the soil, and then we're good to go. Every time we have crops that are 100 days or more, like the nightshades, we want to have landscape fabric that's covering the soil. That helps for weeds, and it also helps for water retention. And so, since we're always using the same spacings, we've made holes in these landscape fabrics, and these guys should last a lifetime. To make the hole, we have different sizes according to different plants, and it's pretty easy. We burn a hole in the landscape fabric using a blowtorch. Any discussion about direct seeding should start by telling you that for all of the crops that we can do inside and transplant in the field, we prefer to do that. Transplanting and starting your seedlings inside the greenhouse guarantees that you'll have good germination rates, uniformity when you're transplanting, but also it allows you to have more lag time with your successions. When the seedlings are in the greenhouse, they don't occupy bed space. This being said, there's a lot of crops that you can't do with transplants. You need to be drop seeding them in the garden. When we started market gardening, we would do this by hand. I remember Modelaine, she would be really fast and just go at it, rolling the seeds one by one, dropping them by hand. Then eventually we learned about these precision seeders that made our life so much easier. If you want to be successful as a market gardener, you need to adopt these precision seeders to use them correctly and properly to get both the singulation of the seeds and the proper spacings on the row. One of the key elements when using these precision seeders is to have a clean bed. You need to make sure that your soil is level, firmed, and all of the debris, rocks, weeds, whatever, are removed, making sure that your seeder won't jam when you're using it in the soil. Also, you need to make sure that the soil is dry enough. As a general rule of thumb, if you're taking up soil and it's not forming a sticky ball, then you're ready to go and you won't be clogging your seeder that way. The second thing is that you want to make sure that you're measuring your densities to make sure that you're putting enough or not too much of the seeds that you're dropping. I do this by measuring with a scale the weight of the seeds in my package before I seed. Then after I've finished seeding, I'm going to measure the package again, and then that's going to give me how much seeds have been dropped in the ground. I have with me targets that I've measured over years, and since all of our beds are 100 feet long, it was pretty easy to figure out, let's say 4 rows of carrots on 30 inch, I wanted to have 20 ounces of seeds for optimal spacings. So I have targets for all of my crops, and then I compare what I've just done with my targets. If I've put too many seeds in the ground, I can adjust my seeders, and if I haven't put enough, then I'm not gonna wait 3 weeks to figure it out, and then I can just do another pass with the seeder. I'd rather put more seeds into the ground and thin them than have holes on the bed.
At the farm, we use different hand-push seeders depending on which crop we're seeding. The Swiss-made Glaser seeder is simple and well designed. It can be adjusted for 3 different seed sizes, and we find that it generally works well for small seeds, particularly round ones. It doesn't bury the seeds, so you have to come back with a rake to finish the job. The soil must also be really firm and level to get good results with this seeder. The Ertway seeder is a push-type seeder which drops the seeds into a furrow created by an adjustable opening chute. Ertway offers several plates for different seed size or spacings. It works well for beans, peas, or radishes, but it's a lot less effective with smaller round seeds. The 6-row seeder is designed for intensive seeding, and we use it for our mesclun salad mix. After 2 passes over a 30-inch bed, one up and one back down, you'll have dispersed seeds densely enough to cover the bed effectively, shading out potential weeds. We also use the Korean-made Jang seeder, which we like a lot. The seeding mechanism is more precise and more flexible when it comes to spacing. The shoe is also heavier, which means we can use it on bed surfaces that aren't as clean or uniform. This said, it's also longer to calibrate, and it's much more expensive than both the Glaser and the Ertway combined. The depth of planting will affect both germination and emergence rate. In general, seeds should be planted at a depth equal to their thickness, but always double check with your seed supplier.
A great time and space saving technique is to do intercropping. So what we've done here is when we were transplanting cabbages, we also seeded radishes between the rows. And we're gonna be harvesting the radishes 30 days later at the moment where the leaves of the cabbage are ready to touch one another and form the canopy. And so it's great synchronicity. It allows us to produce 2 crops on the same bed, saving us both time and space. Here we find ourselves in the hoop house preparing a seed bed in the middle of the season. I grow in a Norton climate, and so we'll try and do as many successions as possible, doing first seedlings in the spring, summer, and in the fall. I've never really liked to use the walk-behind tractor inside the hoop house because it's hard to maneuver and it creates some nasty fumes that I don't want to handle. I've replaced the walk-behind tractor with a small cultivator that shallowly works the soil, mixes in the amendment on the first inch, and that is powered by a battery drill. This tilther is just a perfect companion if you're either not ready to scale up to the full-on walk-behind tractor, let's say you're on a smaller parcel, or if you're in an urban farm. But here, we use it mainly to do our bed prep inside the greenhouse and all of our hoop houses. The drawback to this little gizmo is that small rocks tend to jam the mechanism, so you need to take time to remove them using your bed preparation rake. Most crops will require at least an inch of water per week, and you can't leave it to chance. You need to make sure that your watering system is fully functional from the start of the season to the end in case there's a drought, a strong heat wave, or simply when you're direct seeding into your soil, making sure that you're keeping the surface of the soil moist and wet throughout the germination process. On the farm, We use mostly overhead sprinklers because you can water more than one bed at the same time. But we also use drip irrigation, but mostly on crops that are under landscape fabric or under a caterpillar tunnel or in the greenhouse, because we can't count on rainfall in those occasions. Take into account that drip irrigation might be great to save water, but it's a lot more work than putting overhead sprinklers. You need to remove each drip per bed every time you're hoeing between the rows. So that factors in if you're doing 2 or 3 hoeing per crops per year. That's a lot of drips to move around. To feed our irrigation system, we use pond water from a pond that we dug, which is about 500 feet away from the gardens. And to really make sure that we're not losing any downtime walking back and forth from the pump, we put an electrical pump that is wired to our tool shed located in the middle of all the gardens. This way, from the flip of a switch, we can easily turn on and off the irrigation system, which sometimes can happen 3 or 4 times a day.
Each one of our 10 garden plots is served by 2 valves running from a main line going around the farm. This means we can have 2 sprinkler lines per plot, each covering 4 or 8 beds, depending on which sprinkler we use. Each line is fitted with a camlock coupler on both ends, so we can move them around quickly without having to point them in any specific direction. Whenever possible, we try to grow together crops that we know will need irrigation. This not only saves water, but reduces the number of times we need to move the lines around.
Weed prevention is a big part of successful market gardening, and keeping all the weeds in check is not an easy thing to do on a 2-acre or 1-acre market garden. We have a couple of tricks that really help. By using intensive spacings, you're quickly creating a canopy that shades out the weeds. On most crops, you'll be cultivating the soil once or twice, and then you're done with the weeds. We're also using a lot of tarps that allows us to cover the ground. As you've seen, they're also helping a lot to diminish the weed pressure in the garden. We use flame weeding, stale seed beds, and even black plastic mulch that we use on certain crops to avoid weeding at all. But even with all of these tricks, weeds still want to pop up in the garden. And that's why we've been following 2 simple principles over the years that can really help you out finding the right way to tackle weeds. You need to be cultivating the soil and not just weeding. When I talk about cultivating, what I mean is that you're shallowly disturbing the soil using hoes. And if there are weeds that are germinating or popping up, the simple action of mixing the soil up will destroy them right there and then. By cultivating your soil with hoes, you're also breaking up the crust, allowing moisture and air to easily penetrate the soil, which should give your crops an extra fertility boost. The best time to do this is when the weeds are, just starting to show or at the 1 or 2 leaf stage. The bigger the weed, the harder it is to do the job effectively. You need to be cultivating when it's bright and sunny outside so that your soil is dry and any uprooted weeds won't have time to reroot itself. Bright and sunny and really early on is the better way to do it. And then it's all a matter of having the right hoe for the right job.
We use different kinds of tools for cultivating, but our favorite ones are long-handled stirrup hoes with swiveling, double-sided cutting blades. They cut the weeds just below the surface, both on the push and pull motion, so it's very fast and efficient, but also ergonomic. When you're working long hours in the field, remember to always keep your back straight. Make sure you have properly sized tools that allow you to do so. We use 3-inch hoes for crops planted in 4 or 5 rows per bed, and the wider 5-inch hoe for crops grown in 2 or 3 rows. We also use a wheel hoe with a very wide blade for some of the crops we grow in 1 row and also to weed the pathways. Keeping your hoes sharp makes a huge difference in terms of efficiency. We sharpen them weekly with an electric grinder and we carry a handheld carbide sharpener for touch-ups while cultivating in the fields. We're always trying out new tools, and we've been experimenting with a battery-powered version of the wheel hoe, which we think could be a promising time saver for some applications.
So the second thing is never let weeds go to seeds. Because when that happens, you multiply your problem by about 1,000,000 times. One Gallisoga plant can give out up to 80,000 weed seeds just around it. We've been practicing this for many years, and I can tell you for a fact that we still have weeds, but we have a lot less weed pressure than we used to. One other trick to hold back weeds on the farm is to use plastic mulch. The big difference between them and landscape fabric is that, they cost 1/5 of the price, and you can configure your holes according to different spacings, so they're more versatile in that way. We use biodegradable plastic mulch. They're certified organic. What ends up happening is that they'll photodegrade at the end of the year. We harvest everything, and we'll cover the plastic mulch with dirt, and then we're good to go for the next year. So we use a lot of mulches on the farm, landscape fabric and biodegradable mulch, and we also use some natural straw. Word of caution about using straw as a mulch is that if it comes from conventional farming, most often than not, it can come with herbicides residue that can be really noxious for your crops. If it's from an organic farm, well, most often it's pretty expensive and rare, and if you find some, you need to make sure that there's no weed seeds in the straw. Otherwise, you're creating a big mess for yourself in the years to come.
The straw we use on our garlic is made from first cut fall rye. It's harvested early in the summer before any weeds have gone to seed, so it's almost guaranteed to be free of any herbicides. Another way to control weeds is to use the stale seedbed technique. The idea is to prepare the bed 10 to 15 days before the seeding date, giving weed seeds time to germinate. When we're ready to seed, we come back and shallowly work the soil again to destroy the weeds that have popped up.
The more weeds you can get rid of before you plant, the less you'll have to deal with afterwards. And you can use row covers, you can make sure that your beds are always kept wet, or even use clear plastic to stimulate weed growth. You can push the stale seedbed technique even further by using a flame weeder. We use this for carrots on the farm. We'll prepare our soil 10 days prior to the seeding date, and then carrots, they'll take from 8 to 12 days to germinate. So that leaves about 20 days head start for the weeds to pop up. Then, just before the carrots are ready to emerge, we go with the flame weeder and we burn all the weeds that have popped up, leaving our carrots to germinate in guaranteed weed-free soil.
The flame weeder doesn't burn them right off, but gives small weeds a fatal thermal shock. Flame weeding is something you absolutely have to do right. Otherwise, you'll have made the situation worse by promoting weed growth in the first place. We use a flame weeder with 5 burners to make sure we cover the entire bed, and it's also shielded on the side so that we can use it even in windy conditions. To know exactly when our carrots are about to emerge from the ground, we throw in a handful of beet seeds at the start of the bed as an indicator. Under the same growing conditions, beets will always emerge before carrot seeds. If you're growing beets, use radishes instead as the indicator.
One misconception that I hear often is that if you do everything right, if your soil is prepared the right way, if you're using the right amendments, if you're doing everything right, you shouldn't have any insect problems. Well, I don't know about that, but I've been farming commercially for the last 13 years, and insects and problems with them have always been part of the scene. I've also never visited an organic farm that didn't have any insect problems. You're better off dealing with them than having this wishful thinking that they just won't appear. How we go about it is that we make sure that we know what the possible problems are ahead of time and we try to prepare for them. Our favorite solutions is these insect nets. They're a mechanical barrier that will give you peace of mind that your crops is protected underneath it. So there's different nets with different hole size, the mesh size. And that makes a difference because the smaller the size, the weaker the net is, and it's going to wear and tear after just a couple of years. There's other nets that have bigger size mesh, and these are more rugged and strong. So it's not a one size fit all. You need to know which insect you want to protect your crop against, and then you find the net for that insect. The mesh size for sweet midge is not the same one as, let's say, for the cucumber beetle. The other thing is that you should be knowing in advance which insect might become a problem in your garden and have a protocol to make sure that it's taken care of when you're either transplanting or taking care of everything else. It's possible to use row covers to protect your crops against insect, but you need to remember that row covers, they trap in the extra heat. So when you're in the spring and in the fall, this is really what you want, but in the heat of the summer, when it gets really hot, that extra heat can become a big problem for certain crops. So that's why we substitute them for these insect nets. They don't have any thermal capacities, won't trap extra heat, and the crops will breathe a lot easier, and they'll do the job just as well. Here's a great example of why insect nets are so important. You see the difference between crops that have been covered and crops that haven't been covered, attacked by the flea beetles. A great way to never let this happen is to always make sure that you're putting the nets when you're seeding the crop. It's at that moment in time that you're focused on what you're doing, you're putting the nets right there and then, and you'll be sure then that you won't get any problems later on. So the take-home message here is make sure that when you're seeding, you're always putting your insect nets at that moment in time.
Insect nets are a great help, but for crops like squash that require pollination, you'll have to take them out once your plant starts flowering. One technique we use to control the cucumber beetles on our cucurbits is to burn them with a blowtorch while they hang out in the squash flowers. A really quick and precise burn will kill the bugs without damaging the flower. This is something you want to do super early in the morning before bees come out. When dealing with insect pests, it's important to know your enemy. Each insect has a development cycle that we need to be aware of and prepared for before the season starts. If you know that carrot flies are a problem in early to mid-August, plan ahead, mark your calendar, and have your carrots covered by then. In the same way, it should be part of your strategy to protect brassicas grown in the summer from flea beetles. It's important to know which insects are present in your market garden at all times. Since our farm is small, 15 minutes every morning is enough for a quick tour to check on crops or for the presence of certain insect pests. You should know what to look for and how to look for it. For example, one technique we use to inspect our peppers and eggplants for tarnished plant bug is to shake the plants over a piece of white paper. The nymphs fall on the surface and are then much easier to identify. Biopesticides are the last resort to control insect problems on the farm. The products we use are all certified for organic vegetable production, but we know that they're not harmless. I believe that a market gardener should strive for ideal. But sometimes, biopesticides are the only solution left to prevent losing a crop. To protect our cukes from cucumber beetle and the bacterial wilt they propagate, we sealed our hoop house with insect nets. We also installed an airlock type entrance to reduce the chances that they might sneak in as we go in and out. Another way we control pests in the greenhouse is by introducing beneficial or predatory insects. We've had good success in controlling trips with predatory mites, And in the past, we've also purchased ladybugs when aphids were a problem. Even though our farm is mostly surrounded by large-scale monocultures, we tried to create as biodiverse an environment as we could on our 2-acre plot. Our gardens are lined with hedgerows that play a double role of windbreak and wildlife habitat. We also have annuals and perennial flowers growing throughout the farm, in addition to several fruit trees and shrubs. Besides giving us the pleasure of living and working in a beautiful environment, all this biodiversity attracts quantity of birds, pollinators, and other beneficial insects. The pond located behind the house also creates ideal conditions for frogs and amphibians who give slugs a hard time.
Harvesting is a big part of the work we do here in the market garden. I'd say that it's about 50% of the time that we spend on the farm is spent harvesting. It's important to harvest each vegetable at the right time. If harvested too early, they won't develop their full flavor and nutritional value, and if harvested too late, they won't keep and store as well. Vegetables need to be harvested as early as possible in the morning, and it's also as critical to cool them as quickly as possible after you've harvested them. This way you maintain their appearance of freshness and their nutritional value.
The time of picking is not always synchronized with the time of sale, so it's important to have a walk-in cooler to store the harvest until we're ready to bring it to market. Vegetables keep on living after they're picked, and cooling them quickly will help maintain their freshness and nutritional value. I recommend getting a cold room twice as large as you think you'll need. Not only will it be much easier to work in, but also have better airflow, which is key for cooling vegetables. It's important not to underestimate your future needs when making such a big investment. Choosing the right bins to store vegetables in the cold room is important. Ideally, they should be big enough, but not so big that they're too heavy to carry when full. They should have a closable lid to hold in moisture and prevent vegetables from drying out in the cold room. Bins should be robust and stackable so that you can pile them onto one another. They should be easy to clean and have holes in the bottom to allow wash water to drain out. We keep our cold room at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and our main storage space is naturally kept at about 60 degrees, which allows our vegetables to cool down naturally. We sell almost all our vegetables the day after they're harvested. The harvest process generally happens in 3 steps: collection from the garden, temporary storage and washing, and final refrigeration in the cold room. Leaf vegetables are always the first thing we harvest, and we quickly bring them to storage. We spray them with cold water to help them cool down until the washing step. After they're washed and drained, we immediately store them in the cold room. Root vegetables sold in bunches are sorted and bunched in the garden, or brought to our warehouse to be bunched later on. While waiting to be washed, they'll get sprayed with cold water to keep the tops fresh. At the washing stage, we rinse the bunches off and place them in storage bins. Cucumbers will be crunchiest if they're cooled immediately after their harvest. We therefore quickly immerse them in a cold water bath and then drain and store them in the cold room in a bin marked with the harvest date. Tomatoes can be harvested any time of day, but must be handled with care not to affect their shelf life. We store tomatoes at ambient temperature in the same bins used for the harvest. This way, we only need to handle them once. Mesclun mix is harvested early in the morning, immersed in a cold water bath and gently swirled to mix sizes and colors. It's then spun in an electric spinner and packed into plastic bags which go in the cold room. Basil is usually harvested first thing in the morning before we head to market. It should never be harvested wet or kept in a sealed bag, as moisture will turn the leaves black. Summer squash is harvested every 2 or 3 days while the fruits are small. We only wash them if they're dirty following heavy rains, and we store them in the cold room in bins marked with the harvest date. Summer onions can be harvested any time of day, and we usually save them for when most of the harvest is finished. They are bunched in the garden, hosed down to remove soil, and stored in the cold room. Harvesting is such a big part of the work on the farm that every effort must be made to be more efficient. Most harvesting involves small repeated actions, and sometimes only conscious attention and practice will help speed up the work. This being said, we're always on the lookout for tools and techniques that will allow us to become more efficient. A great example of this is the greens harvester. It's a simple tool that runs on a battery-powered drill and that we use to harvest some of our mesclun greens. For this specific crop, the greens harvester has been an absolute game changer for us. One person can do in 45 minutes what used to take 3 people at least 2 or 3 hours. The way we've designed our conditioning area is also key to the overall efficiency of the harvest. The entryway, the main storage area, the washing station, and the cold room are all located within close proximity, so we never need to move veggies around over long distances. This is also helpful when loading crates from the cold room into the truck.
So the land constraint on the farm has always forced us to look at ways to get more yields per square foot. And onions is a prime example of this. We used to plant onions in straight rows, and now we've just changed a pattern where we're transplanting them in clumps of 3. So the good thing about that is that it goes 3 times faster to transplant the onions, which is quite long otherwise. It's also a lot easier to weed, to cultivate the soil around the onions. You get more yields, and also when you're harvesting, you're streamlining operations. You're harvesting them already bunched. This way, you eliminate one of the harvesting steps.
When starting your market garden, it's perhaps not realistic to try and grow everything at once. Perhaps it's better to focus on certain crops that are more lucrative or profitable. One example of this is carrots. We sell all of our carrots with the tops on. Bunching your carrots and leaving the tops on shows your client that it's fresh, and that's how you're able to get a better price for the same vegetable. Another great way is to grow crops that have shorter life cycles, like radish, turnips, mesclun, and lettuce. Crops that are within the 50 days harvest you can relay them and have 2 or 3 successions in one growing season. Tomatoes are another example of profitable crops, and on the farm, sales of tomatoes are about 30% of our income. Learning how to grow successful greenhouse tomatoes is not as easy as it looks. It's a worthwhile investment to perhaps hire an agronomist to teach you how to do this, so to develop the know-how and the skill set to grow high-yielding greenhouse tomatoes. That's how we've learned, and that's a great way to go about it.
Greenhouse tomatoes are a delicate crop and require frequent watering, fertilizing, pruning, and trellising. Add to that a constant monitoring of airflow, humidity level, and looking out for pests and disease. All in all, you pretty much need someone fully dedicated to this one crop. On our farm, one person is in charge of making sure tomatoes always have what they need. We tend to prioritize profitable crops, but we also want to offer our customers a variety of products so that they can find everything they need at our market booth. We also continuously experiment with new cultivars to try and keep our clients engaged and interested. What to grow when needs to be decided ahead of time, and we'll prepare a detailed crop calendar during the winter months to make sure we don't forget anything. The calendar would include seeding, transplanting, and harvesting dates, but also anything else we need to remember during the busy growing season.
Everything we've shown you in this film didn't happen overnight. Those are tools and techniques that we've developed over several years of experimenting. And be sure that we've made many mistakes along the way. Hopefully, this film can help you avoid some of the traps that we fell into when we started out. No matter the size of your project, whether it's a backyard garden, a small urban farm, or a full-size market garden, you don't need everything that we've talked about to get started. Start small and take it from there. And remember, constraints of space and time can be your best teachers, forcing you to optimize your resources and in turn, getting you to be more productive and efficient. We don't pretend that our model is perfect, and we're always trying to find new ways to improve, whether it's new cultivars, new techniques, or new tools. We're committed to staying small, and our goal has always been to learn how to grow better, not bigger. I believe there's never been a better time to get into farming. And I'm reminded of this every week when I go at farmers market and I meet scores of people lining up to buy locally grown, freshly harvested organic produce. And there's a lot of ways you can get into farming, replacing heavy machinery with techniques and tools that can help you develop a successful market garden. I hope that what you've seen in this video will help you understand what it looks like to have a small successful farming operation, but also how to get there, how to adopt the right strategies to make this work out for you. In the end, the goal is to get more people into farming because our world needs more farmers. There's one thing that I haven't told you, and I hope you'll understand this. Farming is hard work. And before committing to becoming a small organic farmer, it might be a great thing to go on and work 1 full year on somebody else's organic farm. You'll know if you like the work, if you like being outside, and you'll know if you're fully committed to this lifestyle. So if you're interested in becoming a farmer, just do it.
So I think I'm just gonna forget about this, get my kite surf, and go hang out at the lake.
Dans le design puis dans la...
Oh, dans mon cou, et coco. Oh, ok. Oh, il me donne une émotion là. When you get to the end, make sure that your rope is tightly knot to a strongly incorporated. On s'en va, on change de projet. Là, je radote. Ça roule?
Preparar la tierra para cultivar pepinos.
We have many tricks on the farm to help us
You guys ready? Let's smoke and do this.